Good morning. My name is Yiakoumi. I'm the publisher of the Automotive Logistics Group, which includes our publications, Automotive Logistics Magazine, Finished Vehicle Logistics Magazine. We're the organisers of a multitude of conferences all around the world, including currently two, possibly three specialist finished vehicle. So welcome to Finished Vehicle Logistics North America 2014. And this year, Finished Vehicle Logistics will be one of our live events. That means it's going to be streamed live across the world on the internet to registered delegates who'll be watching us from China, India, Europe, different parts of America. Some of you might have taken part in the very first time we did this at Automotive Logistics Global, including, I remember Patrick from ICL sending me messages from 30,000 feet up in the air saying he was watching the conference live while he was flying back home. You can see more information about how to participate in the live part of Finished Vehicle Logistics on the screen, hopefully, and on the inside back page of the conference program. But Finished Vehicle Logistics Live is not just about the live streaming. It's not just about watching the conference from around the world. So I hope I haven't given you any ideas there. It's about participating online. It's about sending questions or comments to the audience, sending questions and comments to the stage, to the moderator of the panels. It's a way of sharing your experience here with tweeting outside about what you're seeing and to read tweets of other people about what they're seeing in the conference. It's a really interactive experience, and I hope you'll join it. Switch on your devices, your iPhones, your Androids, your iPads or other tablets, and really be a part of this. Also, we'll be using the Finished Vehicle Logistics Live platform for some surveys, some voting surveys. So where we used to have the clickers and the buttons, we're now going to be doing it all online. So please register for Finished Vehicle Logistics Live and be part of the whole event. As I'm sure you'll know, this year's been a great and yet challenging year for the vehicle logistics industry. So that's why we brought you all to California, nearly 100 degrees of heat, to talk about snow. But whilst it's been a challenging year, perhaps it's also given us a chance to show people how flexible we are, how we can handle these challenges, and how important we are to the automotive industry. So I hope and think we put on a great conference program over the 2 days, looking at all different areas, trying to find solutions, new ideas, different ways of doing things, measuring things from damage to capacity to Mexico. I hope a lot of these areas will be covered over the next two days, so please really participate and be part of the whole conference. I normally say at our conference that our events are not just about the speeches, it's also about the networking. Well, I think at Finished Vehicle Logistics North America, I have to say the opposite. It's not just about the networking, it's not just about the golf, it's not just about the lunches and the coffee breaks and the cocktail receptions. We've got some great sessions and presentations lined up, so please make sure you're in for those as well. And I think the networking got off to a great start at the Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics hosted cocktail reception. It was great to hear the buzz and the noise and the business being done already from the very first moment of the conference. That as a conference organizer, it makes us feel very confident that the next 2 days will be good because you've shown your desire to be a part of the conference. On that note, I'd like to thank our sponsors, our premier sponsor, Jack Cooper, our global sponsor, Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics, who they're called the global sponsor because they sponsor all of our conferences around the world, our gold sponsors, CTM, ICL, KHS, JMN, Tech, and Voith. And our silver sponsors, Amports, Hyundai Glovis, Inform, Insight Network Logistics, Masni, Pat Auto Transport, Metrogistics, Unicar, Union Pacific, United Road, US Auto Logistics, and Vascor. So please. So thank you to them for their support. But the reason they do it is because they've got services, people, knowledge, ideas that will help you do your job better and hopefully provide you with some solutions. So meet their people, visit their stands, and I'm sure you'll find it valuable to hear what they've got to say. Please also take the chance to step outside, not just for sun and to have a quick cigarette, but also to see some of the trucks and wagons that are parked outside to see some of the new ideas that they're presenting. The conference format will be as it usually is. Firstly, we're going to start off with a main session. Then we'll split into streams, into two sets of two streams, and then we'll get back together for one plenary session at the end of the day. And then from there, we'll be going direct to our dinner venue this evening. The presentations will go first, so the Q&A will be at the end of all the presentations. There won't be questions after each individual presentation. And the presentations will be made available at the end of the conference. After the conference, we'll send you a special link where you can see the presentations and at your leisure, you might say. But the first session we tried to bring together in the opener to discuss three of the main things about finished vehicle logistics, and we'll be talking over the next couple of days, is the market, what's the market situation, the customer, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for, is to serve the customer, and through that, with the logistics service provider and the car maker, to get an understanding of what they're doing to support your industry. So the first speaker of the day, I'd like to welcome to the podium the Senior Analyst of Americas from PwC Autofacts, Brandon Mason. Thank you, Brandon.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Louis, I'm sorry I missed golf last night. I was stuck in Detroit trying to avoid tornadoes, so happy to be here in sunny Southern California today. What I want to do with the time I have this morning is walk you through our outlook. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the global industry and then focus specifically on North America. So if you take a look at our global top line, this is our light vehicle assembly outlook. You can see last year we came in at around 83 million units. And this year we're forecasting growth of about 4 million units globally to 87 million units. What you'll see at the end of our forecast window is that we're reaching 108 million units of light vehicle assembly. That represents roughly a 3.8% compound annual growth rate. What you should take away from this slide, though, is that growth between 2013 and 2020, of that growth, over 80% of that volume is coming from emerging markets. And I think we all know that developing Asia Pacific holds the lion's share of that. The gray area that you see above the red bars there, that's our excess capacity. And in terms of excess capacity, it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? So it depends on the region, the country, the OEM, or even the particular plant. But you can bet that a lot of that excess capacity continues to come from China, particularly some of the domestic OEMs there that have very low utilization rates. And we don't see that changing a whole lot throughout the forecast window, although in developed markets, we do see very high utilization levels. So if we look at it from another perspective and look at it from a regional breakdown, let me just go around the different regions that we have here. I'll start off with the European Union. What we're showing here is the contribution to growth of that 2013 to 2020 growth, and then the 2013 versus 2020 top line. So the European Union, 12.9% contribution to growth during our forecast period. They're just now starting to hit their stride in terms of their recovery. Theirs was a delayed, where ours was over the last few years here in North America. The European Union is just now starting to show consistent growth, primarily in their 5 main markets. But we do see stronger growth opportunity throughout the forecast window because they're at a relatively depressed level coming from 2013. A big topic of conversation lately has certainly been the ongoing developments in Crimea. Now, we don't think that's going to have a long-term impact on our Eastern European outlook. We do think there will be a moment of pause in terms of the investment announcements that have come for that region, but we do think longer term that there still be strong growth, both to meet domestic demand and as an export hub to other markets. And I alluded to it in the last slide. You can see developing Asia Pacific, over 60% contribution to growth. So it's not just China, but it's also India. It's also the ASEAN markets showing very strong growth. One outlier that you see here is the developed Asia Pacific region, which consists of South Korea, Australia, and Japan. I think most of us in this room know that over the last several months that the 3 automakers that actually produce vehicles in Australia have all announced that they're shuttering their facilities, mainly due to high labor costs and relatively low volume. So Australia will have 0 light vehicle assembly by 2017. The other 2 markets, Japan and South Korea, a lot of that has to do with the strategic realignment of the OEMs in those markets, specifically localizing assembly in markets that they currently export to. In North America, lucky for us in this room, is going to be a huge benefactor of that. Middle East and Africa, we show 5.5% contribution to growth. Doesn't seem like a lot, but if you look at the assembly top line below, they're almost doubling their assembly top line in the next 7 years. A lot of that is kit assembly, but still, it's still growth nonetheless. In South America, I think South America has taken a bit of a turn down over the last several months. A lot of that has to do with inflation. I think that the economic impact that was expected in Brazil, specifically with the World Cup and the upcoming Olympics in Rio in 2016, hasn't been as impactful as some people hoped. We do think longer term, particularly with the Inver-Auto legislation, which essentially incentivizes OEMs to localize assembly in Brazil, we do think that the investment in the assembly in that market will continue to increase, but in the near term, there's certainly a bit of a pause. In other markets like Argentina and Venezuela, they have similar economic issues. Venezuela is a bit of an extreme where assembly in that market has essentially screeched to a halt, and we're not quite sure if or when that assembly will pick back up. So that's a little view of the rest of the globe, but we are here today to talk about North America and the exciting opportunities that we have within our own region. So let's break it down by country here first. Well, let's start at the top line. 16.2 million units of assembly in 2013. We're forecasting that number to hit 18.8 million units by 2020. That's 16% increase from 2013. But it's a bit of a mixed bag if you look at the different countries there. In Canada, we are actually forecasting a 32% decline in assembly volume. We're forecasting not 1 but 2 plant closures in that country, and that assembly will shift to a mix between the U.S. and Mexico. A lot of that has to do with the strength of the Canadian dollar. It used to be that the U.S. to Canadian dollar ratio is very favorable to put assembly in Canada. But it's a relatively small market from a sales perspective, as you can see on the chart, the pie chart in the top right. And it just doesn't seem sustainable with the high labor costs there. So we're forecasting that assembly volume to shift southward to the U.S. and Mexico. In the U.S., we're not forecasting a whole lot of new capacity being installed, rather making better use of the existing capacity in that market. We've seen some OEMs move their shift patterns to the 3-2-120 shift patterns to make better use of the time that they have. We do forecast, I think, 1 to 2 new assembly facilities in the U.S., but you can see most of the growth is actually coming from Mexico. We have no fewer than 7 assembly plants opening in Mexico between 2013 and 2020. It's just a massive amount of growth that we show for that market. And it's due to a combination of factors, right? Obviously, we look at Mexico, we think, okay, it's cheap labor. That's one element. If you look at from the perspective of the Asian and European OEMs, you're saving on shipping and logistics costs by localizing assembly there. And they have a number of free trade agreements. So if you're localizing assembly in Mexico, you're not only serving the North American market, but all the key Latin American markets as well. So there's a lot of benefits to locate in Mexico. I think the ongoing discussion that we're going to probably talk about a lot over the next few days is how, from an infrastructure standpoint, do you address a 40+% increase in assembly volume in that market? It's a huge amount of growth, and it's something that we in this room will have to discuss and try and deal with. So when we talk about North America, we tend to talk about assembly. When we talk about sales, we try and focus mainly on the U.S. You can see there that while the assembly share is a bit more diverse in the market, the sales share is very much dominated by the U.S. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the U.S. market, and I'm going to talk about some of the small sampling of some of the variables that we track within the Autofacts group. So first, let's take a look at our our sales top line. Last year we came in at 15.5 million units of sales. We're forecasting 16.2 million units of sales this year. Certainly not to where we were at prior to the downturn. You see that we maxed out around 17 million units a year, but it's still strong growth. What you'll see is from over the last 4 years, we've had at least 1 million units of year-over-year sales growth. We don't expect that to happen this year because we think that a lot of that pent-up demand that occurred during the downturn is pretty much exhausted itself. So we think that 16.2 million units is more indicative of where true market demand is at. We had a bit of a rough start to the year. Those in the Midwest can attest, and Louis mentioned it as well. We had a lot of snow. Sitting in a couple feet of snow and 20 degrees below zero temperatures doesn't make people want to go out and purchase new vehicles. And that was evidenced by the GDP announcement. The Q1 GDP in the U.S. was 0.1%. So it was a very rough quarter for not just the auto industry, but across the board. But the market started to pick up the last few months. We've started to see the demand, the pace pick back up. So we do think that the 16.2 million units that we forecasted at the beginning of the year will hold true. One thing that I also like to mention, if you look at the chart on the right, we do have historically some artificial spikes in SAR. Prior to the recession, we very much had a push model. And when I say push model, I mean that the industry were very much pushing vehicles onto consumers, be it retail or fleet, through use of subsidized financing, high levels of incentives, a number of different factors. And so when the downturn hit, it hit especially hard because we had exhausted and pulled ahead so many sales. You see a few spikes there. The one in the summer of 2005, if anybody remembers the employee discount for everyone program, and the debatable whether it worked or not, the Cash for Clunkers program in 2009. So we don't think that, absent any artificial inflationary factors that, we're at a push model yet. We think that right now we're at regular market demand. But we do see some signs that could be changing. Inventory is a prime example of that. So this is historical inventory levels. If you look back in 2004, the first circle on the left there, so annual sales in the U.S. that year were around 16.9 million units. You see inventory hovered between 4 and 4.5 million units. So you had roughly a 90-day supply, about 25% of total vehicle sales for the year was sitting in inventory. Then we had the downturn. Inventory dropped all the way down to 1.4 million units. Basically, the industry had to stop producing vehicles for a few months to get down to that level. Now, that represented about 13% of annualized sales. And now the ramp back up, right? And right now we're at around 23% of annualized sales if you assume 16.2 million units this year. We're a little concerned with that number. We're still hovering around 90 days, but inventory continues to grow. Assembly is not going to stop, right? So we're becoming increasingly concerned that different mechanisms like more fleet sales or more incentives on vehicles will have to occur. And what we don't want, because the industry has been fairly disciplined over the last few years coming out of the downturn, is to get back to the push model. So fleet sales, if you take a look at the chart on the left, you can see right now fleet sales are between 17 and 18%. There are generally spikes in the first 4 months of the year. This is primarily due to Asian OEMs that have a March 31 fiscal year end, want to get a lot of sales towards the end of their fiscal year. So you see significant spikes in incentives and subsequently fleet sales during January through March. We don't expect that number, that 17 to 18% number, to drop off like it's done over the last few years. So you can see the drop-offs there. It's simply a matter of inventory's gone too high, assembly's not slowing down anytime soon, so there has to be a release mechanism, and fleet is generally the easiest way to accomplish that. Another element that we look at and keep a close eye on is auto finance. During the downturn, finance was extremely restricted. Even if you were a super prime borrower, you had a hard time getting a loan, and you certainly didn't have it at a very good rate. The chart on the left shows the average prime interest rates over time, and you can see that we're still near a historical low, which is really helping drive new vehicle sales. Right now it's around 4.4%. The other thing that we've seen is an emergence or reemergence of subprime financing. You can see the shift, although subtle, it continues to grow from 2012 to 2013. You can see below prime continues to eke up. And quite frankly, why wouldn't lenders want to get in the subprime business? There's a lot of money to be made. The default rates are extremely low. One thing, again, that we keep an eye on and need to be cautious of as an industry is not to go overboard on subprime financing, because then the default rates will start to pick back up. But you do see more and more companies getting into the subprime financing space. Right now, used car values are still pretty high, close to historical highs. We do expect that number to start to come down as a lot of new vehicles or a lot of lease vehicles come off lease, and that should help flood the used car market a little bit and drive that value down. Okay, the last thing I want to just talk about is this is our outlook by year for the region. And again, I said 16.2 million units for 2013. We're forecasting 18.8 million units for 2020. And as you can see, the utilization rate there, which is on the right axis, extremely highly utilized market, which you would expect from a mature market, right? Because your labor costs are high, you need to be very efficient. So we're running at 90+% utilization from an operational standpoint in North America. Very highly utilized. The chart on the right, this is our Alliance Group outlook, so 2013 versus 2020. What you'll see is the hierarchy doesn't change all that much, particularly from the traditional big three automakers. They are largely capacity constrained, right? You can see on the chart on the left there that as a region, we uninstalled roughly 5 to 6 million units of capacity leading up to the downturn. So I think there's some hesitancy in new capacity investments for some of the domestic OEMs. But where you see a lot of growth from is below that, right? The new domestics or foreign OEMs are investing heavily. And as I alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, Mexico is a big contributor to that. So those are all my prepared remarks. I look forward to your questions and comments. One thing I did want to mention is if anybody's interested in signing up for our monthly Analyst Note publication, you can do that in a variety of ways. You can scan the QR code or just go to autofacts.com and sign up. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Brandon, for giving us an optimistic view or a positive view on the future of our industry, particularly in North America, but globally as well. Next up, I'd like to welcome to the stage the Executive Vice President of Aftersales and Services from Volkswagen Group of America, Bures. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you so much for that very nice introduction. And one thing I wanted to say after I have seen Brent's presentation here is that, excuse me, when he forecasted for Volkswagen Group a sales volume of 1.1 million in 2020, then he was, with that forecast, he was right on the mark. So that is exactly the number we have planned that we're going to sell in 2020. So congratulations.
Thanks for the plug, Jan.
You must have very, very well utilized sources. Yeah, speaking at a weekly logistics conference is always something remarkable, something outstanding. Louis said it last night when he said at the opening of the dinner that the most important part was tonight, speaking of last night, meaning that networking and meeting people, greeting, and simply making sure that one gets to know each other. That was the part of yesterday and the most important part of yesterday. So today, it only can get worse. I have prepared 95 slides I would like to share with you. But before I do that, a little bit of sharing of why I'm here and why most of you are most likely here. It is about that, talking about the industry, it is about that feeling the pulse of our industry. And it is also about to making sure that we are heading the right way in the future with the industry we are working in. That is my agenda I have prepared for today. I'd like to familiarize you a little bit with our organizational structure. Then, of course, we will be talking about our current network in finished vehicle logistics, as well as what we have planned for the future. I will be sharing a couple of the results with you we have been yielding in. We will be also talking about spare parts, because logistics in Volkswagen Group of America includes spare parts distribution as well. And then I'd like to sort of share with you a couple of key factors we believe are important for success, and then of course the future heading. Volkswagen Group of America consists out of mainly two brands. One brand is the Volkswagen brand. Most of you are familiar with Mark McNabb, who has been working for a number of manufacturers. He is the head of Volkswagen brand, as well as the Deputy Vice President for Volkswagen Group of America. And then there is Audi Incorporation, Scott Keogh. He's the president of Audi Incorporation in the US. Then we have a finance arm. Then we have Group Aftersales and Services. We have HR, we have Volkswagen and Audi Credit, and we have a lot of other directly into the president reporting departments like PR, legal, and so on and so forth. IT, not to forget. IT is always very important, although IT tends to be forgotten in these slides. I do admit to it. And we have recently welcomed in the US our new president and CEO of the company, Michael Horn, who has taken over as the CEO and president of Volkswagen Group of America, effective as of January 7th of 2014. Group After Sales and Services is organized, as you can see here. We have the group market research team. So that is the folks who work also with people like Brandon, with Urban Science, who do conduct vehicle clinics, who do forecast market trends and volumes. Then we have the logistics part. As said already, logistics consists out of two. One is the parts logistics part, and the other one is the vehicle logistics part. Service and tools, group customer care and roadside, parts sales operations. So we are selling and we are pricing spare parts as well. And then we have the two directors. Then we have the director of Audi After Sales and the vice president of Volkswagen After Sales, reporting in a dotted line relationship into Group After Sales. Our logistics network we have set up in the US for imports of vehicles. You see that we are currently operating 4 ports. We are operating next to the 4 ports. We are operating railheads. I come to those railheads later on. So while importing vehicles, the ports do still play a very important and vital role. You see the numbers in volume for 2013 and the expected numbers for 2018. And when you guys do the quick math, and I'm sure that most of you are capable of doing so, you notice a discrepancy between 1.1 million in 2020 and the ones you see here designated for import. Yes, the remainder of it will be mainly manufactured in the US. So a 4-port network for importing vehicles. We are still struggling nowadays when we are seeing significantly higher volumes, in particular for Audi. We are struggling to get production into the country through the port of San Diego because of the uncertainty of the Panama Canal. That is hard to predict what's going on in the Panama Canal, at what time you will actually arrive at the Panama Canal in order to hit your slot. Otherwise, you have to go back in line and wait again for another 4 days to be processed. So that is one of our concerns we currently deal with. We do export out of our manufacturing plant in Chattanooga vehicles into South Korea, vehicles into Mexico, vehicles into Canada, and that will not change. That will continue to be the case. And yeah, what else would you think? The 2 ports you have seen before, Brunswick and Jacksonville, are the ones we are using for exporting Passats out of the US. Railway is becoming increasingly a more and more important factor into ways. One is, of course, speed, and the second is quality. We are highly dependent on our railway providers to make sure that vehicles arrive on time at dealers, as well as vehicles arrive in the right quality. Transportation damages is something we are struggling with since vehicle logistics exist, and you can imagine the eyes of an Audi customer who is supposed to get an R8 delivered, and that car cannot be delivered because of transportation damages that need to be repaired prior to the scheduled delivery. Not a nice encounter. Our main hubs for railway transportation is, of course, Houston, where we take advantage also of the port, and is Chattanooga, where we manufacture the Passat. So that is how we transport vehicles across the country through our railway network. Port processing, I should have shown that slide before. It's not in the right sequence here, so please do apologize. We are not only utilizing at Volkswagen Group of America our ports as just a processing point or point of rest, if you will. What we also do at the ports is we do equip our vehicles with what we call MDO content, market delivered options. So everything that economically makes sense to be put on the car in the ports is being put on the vehicles in the ports. Everything as far as accessories or as far as accessories reach, spoilers, floor mats, what have you. And that is a model we do believe does make a lot of sense, and that is a model we will be continuing developing in the future as well. That is one of the results we are proud of. That is a complicated slide to read. Please pay attention to that black line, which is the 12 days line. We have committed ourselves against when it comes to deliveries of Audi vehicles on time. So our internal target is to have 95% of our allocated Audi volume delivered to dealers within that 12-day period. And as you can see there, the black line, the dark line, is hit only once, January, February, which is exactly the time when we have struggled with snow, winter, ice, and when we didn't have the most pleasant circumstances to transport vehicles. So that is one of our main KPIs. That is something the brands, both brands, Audi and Volkswagen, want to be updated on a weekly basis. And the minute something goes wrong here, then my colleague in finance calls me up and asks me, what is going on? I need the money because this is wholesale. This is wholesale right away. And that money needs to be registered in the register, otherwise the paychecks aren't secured. Very simple relation. I spoke about that we have to prepare ourselves for the future, and that is in particular the case with Audi. You all know that we are building, Audi builds a plant in Mexico where the new Audi Q5 is going to be delivered out of for the US and for Canada. And we are in the middle of preparing ourselves to handle that vehicle as of calendar year 2016 when those new Audi Q5s will be hitting the road. This plant, by the way, is the only plant which will be manufacturing Q5s for Audi worldwide. So out of Mexico then, not only the US demand will be supplied, but also all the other markets worldwide. And that is a big challenge for vehicle logistics, for the vehicle logistics team. Ed Wilson, who sits in the back of the auditorium here today, has a lot ahead of him. But I'm sure that he will be managing that task well. Yeah, a couple of if you will, summary points as far as the vehicle logistics is concerned. I already mentioned that for Volkswagen Group of America, the ports are more than just a processing point. We want to add value inside the ports, and that is what we, in order to do so, we are individualizing our vehicles with accessories and with customer desired individualization. Every now and then, when the market isn't as strong as expected, we tend to utilize ports as storage. Brendan showed increasing numbers in inventory. That already makes us a little bit alert, and we are watching our inventories. We are watching our inventories very carefully, and want to make sure that we don't have too much inventory, so that we don't have to push cars into the markets again. Systems, of course, ICL is here, one of our sponsors of today's conference. We are working with ICL. Real-time location is important, and we need to work on ETA accuracy. Every now and then there is still a gap between what is forecasted and what is actual, so that we have some room for improvement here. The Audi factory in Mexico, as already mentioned, we need to work on further improvement of our service quality. Transportation damages should go down through means of more transportation through railway. We have been conducting a very intense study on full body cover and whether or not it makes sense. I would ask my colleagues from Mercedes and BMW who are here today as well to share their experiences with full body cover or not full body cover, or the alternative of it. E-vehicles, we have to be prepared how to process electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles. And what I think is apparent when you have followed my presentation carefully, we in the industry, we don't have, in the finished vehicle industry, we don't have a real system of benchmarking ourselves. That is something where we, I think, have room for improvement. Every other industry operates on a benchmark basis much more than we do in vehicle logistics. And with that, what are our KPIs and are the values right, and so on and so forth. So that in short and brief is vehicle logistics. Parts logistics. We are operating our network with 6 depots across the nation. On the West Coast, we have one in the county of Ontario, not far from here. Houston, or in Texas, in Fort Worth, in Jacksonville, in Florida, one in Wisconsin. Then we have one in New Jersey, and then the recent addition to the network was the one we have opened in Knoxville. That, by the way, is also a LEED certified depot, in other words, environmentally friendly as much as possible. So environmentally friendly fundamental thoughts were part of the design of this depot, and that is for us, for Volkswagen Group of America, of importance as well. So we are not only want to deliver numbers, figures, want to make customers happy, but we also want to work on the front of being environmentally friendly. In total, our network serves 878 dealers, and our main regime in doing so is what we call next day stock order. That is that final line on the bottom right part of the chart, NDSO, next day stock order for all but 50 of those 878 dealers. That means that a dealer puts in an order until 1 p.m. And he gets that order delivered to his doorsteps next morning, 7 a.m. at the latest. So that is our schedule, our delivery schedule, and so far Our network is quite happy with that. I come to that later on. I mentioned that benchmarking was one of the items, was one of the areas missing in vehicle logistics. We come to parts logistics, and we will be seeing that in parts logistics we have that much more emphasized, that benchmarking thought. That is our internal KPI, which we use to measure whether or not we are on track as far as next day stock accuracy is concerned. You see here calendar week 19, which is last week. 96% of all delivery of all orders were shipped to the dealers as ordered out of their facing depot. You have seen the stars before. And to each of these depots, a number of dealers is associated, and that is then their facing depot. So 96% of the incoming orders from those dealers were delivered out of the facing depot. And then the other number you see there is the 98.9 percentage point figure. That is what we call the network facing fill. Network fill, which is the case when the facing depot is not having that part on stock in their inventory, then that order gets referred to another depot, and that then equals to the 98.9 percentage point fulfillment. So we are running a quite efficient network on the Volkswagen side. Same is true for Audi. We are meeting our objectives here as well, and I may say that one of the prerequisites when you want to sell parts is to be able to deliver parts. Our overall revenue in parts this year is above 340 million, and that is now the I'm sorry, I do apologize, I back off. That is the profit expectation is above $300 million this year, and you can imagine if there is a dent in that curve, then my telephone rings right away as well. And then being able to ship parts is one of the prerequisites in order to be also able to generate money in that business. Coming now to benchmarking, to surveys. Carlisle is conducting annually what they call the Parts Managers Satisfaction Survey. And you see here Volkswagen and Audi rank 6th and 7th in the grid behind Honda, Toyota, Acura, Subaru and Volvo, and we have improved our performance year over year, which is important to us. You see here on the next slide, you see the evolution of our improvement. You see that Volkswagen and Audi both are on top of the makes with the greatest improvement in Parts Managers Satisfaction Survey. We take that very serious. We do know that our parts managers do not depend on us. They can use every other source there is, and that market is fiercely competitive, I can tell you. And seeing those numbers, that is a confirmation that we have done something right in the past, and we will be continuing doing these things that way. JD Power CSI, the recent survey came out in March. Audi scores second, right after Cadillac, a little bit ahead of Lexus this time. Volkswagen is the second strongest brand in the volume segment behind Buick, which is also an outstanding performance. We have improved by 26 points and on the Volkswagen side, and have moved up from rank 16 to rank 13, which is also thanks to the things we have done in the spare parts distribution arena. Without a part being at the dealer, vehicles couldn't be repaired. So that is why I'm sharing that slide here with you. Last but not least, we also want to make sure that our cost structure is always up to par, so that we are not running a fat business, but that we are running an efficient business. You see here the ratio between cost we experience to run that network, and the sales we have generated through that network. And as long as the ratio goes down, you see it went down from 11.5 in 2011 to 10.8 in 2012. 2013 is now at 9.6%. As long as that number goes down or stays stable, then I think we have done a good job. So, I hope that I have not used up too much time, Louis. Tell me if that is the case, but you can't change much anyway, so... yeah, let me summarize sort of our main learnings, or our, how to describe, our philosophy when it comes to logistics. Of course, it is very easy said, but it is so hard to do. Identify your key processes. Keep the key processes more important, and really make them your priority. For those processes we have defined, we need to have the KPIs. I have shared a couple of those KPIs with you here today. Reporting cycles, that is very important. My president wants me to report to him on a weekly basis as far as the logistics numbers are concerned. And in order to do so, yeah, we have to also know our environment. Who is it who is maybe operating a leaner? Who is it who is maybe operating a more efficient network? That is something we need to know. That is nothing that is competing directly for the customer. That is something indirectly, and with that I think benchmarking is a legitimate tool for sharing information. People, work with the best team possible. With the conviction I can say that I have a great team I'm working with. I have a great team I am working with. And without great people, you can't make things happening. So that is really one of the key prerequisites. You have to make sure that there is, otherwise many of the plans will be hard to get done with. Thank you. Operate open and transparent, and that is true for inside as well as outside. Nobody is always perfect. There is always mistakes. That is natural, and we have to be open and transparent about these mistakes. One of the rules is that we want to award mistakes of the week, because when there is no mistakes, then of course there won't be any risks taken, and we also want to encourage our teams to take risks. Of course, manageable risks. However, we don't want to punish our people when there is good-willed mistakes, and that is something we cannot avoid. And again, the theme that we have to foster our teams, that we have to really make sure that we attract talent into our industry. We need to retain that talent. There is one saying I heard the other day, I found, I wanted to share here with you, which is hard work beats talent when talent is not put at work. Which I think is quite true. So let's make sure that we keep our best people with us, and that we attract even more interested and passionate and passionate people into our industry. Okay, with that, I have come to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and to a nice continuation of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan. And it is interesting to hear and compare the service parts logistics and vehicle logistics, two parts that have the same goal, same aim in the end. And it's unusual to have that shared in one department as Volkswagen do. And if it comes to mistakes of the week, I think I would be a clear winner, if only for numbers' sake. But next up, I'd like to welcome to the podium Mike Riggs, the chairman of Jack Cooper Holdings. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.
It's a privilege to be up and speak to everyone. I am really talking on behalf of the auto haulers, trucking companies out there. I'm on the board of directors of the American Trucking Association and the chairman of the Auto Carriers Conference, who met here yesterday. So as we talk about some of this in our slides, I want to be clear. We're really asking on behalf of all the auto haulers out there these things, because the theme in the past few years I've had different speeches, sometimes about capacity, sometimes about equipment, sometimes I think last year my focus was, if you remember, going paperless and trying to drive that agenda. This year my theme is collaboration. The fact is the auto haulers need your help. The reason that I'm speaking to you, and the reason Louis, I think, chose us again to represent the trucking side, this is sort of a graphic. If you look on the left side, what I'd call the domestic production side, there's multiple ways that the vehicles get to the end customer and dealer, whether it's through rail, whether it's from the remarketing side, distribution centers. But you notice that there's trucking involved in almost every situation. You have to have trucking to get there. So when we ask, we're not just asking on behalf of ourselves, but our contention as a group is that we're a necessary component in this vehicle distribution logistics chain, and frankly, we're struggling. If you go to the right, I'll call it more the import model. Vessels come in to a port, but you still notice whether it goes through the rail or direct to truck, there's still a need for trucks in this process. Now, a lot of people are assuming that I'm speaking on behalf of Jack Cooper, and we acquired a company most of you are aware called Allied Holdings, and I've been asked at least 36 times since I've been here, how's that going? For us, to be honest, the Allied transaction is complete. The first quarter, Craig Irwin, Don Herring, and the team have done a magnificent job and absorbed all the new terminals. We're hitting on 8 cylinders. We were told that we'd have as many as 1,500 trucks. To be honest, as we got in and looked at them, there's somewhere between 500 and 700 that we don't believe are usable and will probably be scrapped. But it still gives us somewhere between 800 and 1,000 parked rigs. We're in 80 locations. We're a big player in Canada. We're now in Mexico and intending to acquire another hauler in Mexico and expand our presence there. So, and that allows us to not only be through auto export shippers in the ocean transportation side, the rail and yard management side, vehicle inspection side, claims management side. We even have, I think, something like 500,000 titles in storage. So the Allied acquisition has been a phenomenal success for us and gives us a lot of capacity. So when we talk about some of this, what I'll call asking for your help, it's not necessarily strictly for Jack Cooper. It is on behalf of the industry, because what we see, the same thing Brandon talked about, you notice that he was fairly nonchalant about getting back up to 18.8 million units. So as a part of my slide presentation, I won't ask you to close your eyes, but I will ask you to visualize, because most of us that have been through this last 3 or 4 months think of it more than just a bit of trouble. This was probably one of the biggest struggles we've had in 20 years. Well, imagine a scenario where that's the norm. And that's what I think we have to manage to as this volume comes back. Imagine a scenario which you've just gone through for the last 3 or 4 months, where there's short shipping loads all over the place. They're actually talking about taking loads. I was talking to a shipping executive earlier from Brunswick to San Diego via ship. They're just that desperate. Imagine if that becomes the norm. And what we want to do is, rather than complain about it as a group of car haulers, is propose some solutions for you and be problem solvers, not problem pointer-outers. And I want to highlight that, you know, most of us are using these production numbers that only get us back up to 17 million. But when we hear, we're not thinking about Mexico like we used to, so you really should count North America. And we believe Mexico is going to have a higher growth rate than a lot of people assume. So I actually believe this almost 19 million number is what we should be looking at compared to where we've been. And what that does is from everybody in the room, we should be ecstatic, right? We're nearing record auto sales, and between now and 2020, we've just had a credible expert tell us we're going to get back up to almost 19 million. Should be a good thing. But what's happened is, at least from the car hauler's perspective, there's been sort of a perfect storm, pun intended, given our weather. First of all, 2008, 2009, and I talked about this at the Analyst group, I don't think anybody predicted that the bankruptcies of General Motors and Chrysler and the downturn and the falling off to production below 10 million would change the way lenders looked at our industry. But I had one executive at the Analyst meeting say, look, why don't you guys just go out and buy a bunch of equipment? The problem is that it's not the same as it was pre-2008, 2009. If you imagine buying a house and somebody says you have to put 33% down or 50% down, how does that change how many houses are sold? That's kind of the thing that's going on in the equipment world. If you have perfect, pristine credit, there's a good chance you can pull something off. But remember, now we're also tied to, quote, the auto supply industry and transportation, which is very leveraged. And both of those things are almost like poison ivy to banks. So it's a much more difficult situation for us than it was. And people that have been around 20 years have always said, look, just, I think I'll use Walter Lowe because he and I used to debate this topic, just go out and buy some trucks. It's just not the same for us auto haulers as it has been in the past. Moving on to the second one with the onerous regulations and litigation explosion, I'll say this about the regulations. I will challenge anyone in the room to find any period in history where there's been more negative regulations imposed on any industry than there has been trucking in the last 3 to 5 years. It is stunning. I think if the average person came in and did some kind of business school case study, they wouldn't believe it. They'd think it's a script. But all of us actually have to live with it, and we're having to live with it in an era of driver shortages. On top of that, the reason it's in red, litigation, and I'll just use an example. At my company, we had an accident. Driver, 16 years in the job, absolutely no logbook violations, never had a ticket, never had an accident, hadn't driven in a couple of days, was only a couple hours from when he left and dispatched. 45-year-old kind of guy, absolutely no health issues. A driver that we would all dream to have. And he had a wreck. Nobody really knows what happened. He veered into a car or a truck that was parked on the road and killed a couple of people. Doesn't remember what happened. Now, that process went, I don't know, 12 months. We settled this, I'll just be honest, at $11 million. Can you imagine if, let's just say General Motors had its own fleet, what would that settle at? The only reason it settled at 11 is because we're a little guy. But this litigation explosion goes throughout our organization, whether it's workers' comps, whether it's accidents. That cost is driving up our costs, in addition to all those regulations. Now, in addition, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that have actually reduced load factor that's nobody's fault. But when you increase the weight of the truck for the new emissions by 2,500 pounds and you raise the hood 12 inches to accommodate that extra heat exchange, we only have a 13'6" height limit. It impacts load factor. When you go to straps, you can't chain those things down and save that 3 inches of height. It kills your load factor. And by the way, when you strap the things, believe it or not, they do wiggle a little bit. So you have to put them a little farther apart. Now, was it the right thing to go to straps? Absolutely. But again, from our industry, it killed load factor. Now, I'll take the fourth one and talk about it. The weather is the worst weather I've seen in 20 years. But if you listen to the global warming and you're listening to all of the forecasters, are you really willing to bet your systems, and back to Jan's comment, your processes, on this never happen again? That's a real risk. And I think all of us, therefore, have to manage for what's the worst case. So whether you're talking about the recession and it's requiring much more investment, even to the point of people saying, wait a minute, how come you only have 2 or 3 year contracts? Somebody else gets 7-year contracts, another supply base. That's why, as your lender, would I give you that business? So we're going to have to look at all these things and how much the recession changed it. And by the way, it's not necessarily a positive anymore for it to be auto-related. And we all need to change that image. We need to have that image of partnership stability so that when lenders look at us, they feel comfortable. It's for everybody's benefit. Remember, the theme of this is not to whine, it's collaboration, because we are going to ask for your help. The regulations, anybody that has not gone through the changes in driver regulations, whether it's hours of service, the CSA, the registration, the wellness, sleep apnea, it almost sickens me to go through them all. We've met with Ann Farrow as an executive committee of the ATA, and there's no question, if anything, she's intending on increasing this. So we have to live with that in an era of driver shortages. And what's happened with all these things, the new emissions laws, the strap requirements, and even the truck weight and size changes, which may be good for the planet, what happens is what used to be a load factor of 8, you go back historically, terminal by terminal, and it won't happen every time, but you'll be amazed at how many times, if you talk to a car hauler that's being honest, doesn't matter if it's union, non-union, small or big, what used to be an 8 load factor now can only be 7. What's happening, all putting this in perspective, and Brandon covered this, I thought, very well, is you got to look at the supply and demand, right? What's happening is now that demand is coming back, but the capacity, as you can see, and these are PwC numbers too, that we're quite short on capacity. And the age-old answer is just buy a bunch of trucks, hire drivers. It's not happening. And yes, we're growing, but remember, some of this fleet is so old that even when you see 1,000 new trucks added, you got to wonder, is all that doing replacing the old trucks that should have been scrapped a long time ago? I went up to one of our terminals in Arlington, was so proud because I saw these 10 or 15 trucks lined along the fence. You know, everybody in the room knows I'm generally a finance guy. When we bought Jack Cooper, I admitted that I didn't know that much about the mechanics of car haul, but I knew enough about the industry that we pulled this off with Mr. Cooper. So I went to this Arlington, and I was so proud to see these look like new trucks to me, but they were sort of lined parallel against the fence. So I asked the terminal manager, what are you doing with those in a row? Just curious. He goes, oh, those are a guard. There's some kind of gang thing in Dallas now where they're trying to get initiated by stealing a car, so we're using them as a blockade. I said, well, hold on. Those look like perfectly good trucks. He goes, oh, no, I'd never put a driver in those trucks. That's why we put them up there. What looked like perfectly good trucks to me, my terminal manager that's been doing this thing for 21 years says, I'm not putting them on the road. I won't put my name on them. I don't even want to try to repair them. They're that bad. So that's what I worry about, is that a lot of the capacity in this industry is just that old at a time when the industry needs us. And keep in mind, one more time, what if this first quarter was not a fluke? What if this is the norm we're going to have to operate in? Now, yes, the weather hurt. Nobody's going to disagree with that. Unfortunately, we did have some security camera footage, and we found the culprit for a lot of this, and I'll just let you decide for yourself.
I'm having a bad, bad day. It's about time that I get my way. Steamrolling whatever I see. I'm having a bad, bad day. If you take it personal, that's okay. Watch, this is so fun to see. Oh, despicable me.
I ask you, is that, I don't know. Is it me? For those of you who don't know, the genesis of this idea is he had once had this Guru character on his LinkedIn profile site, so it's Louis' fault. So rather than, again, moan about it, as usual, the group has put together some solutions. We'd like the partners in this room, whether it's co-suppliers, railroad ship companies, OEMs, it doesn't matter. See if you can help us in some of these ideas. We have to do something about this level inventory releases, because in my view, and I think most of the Auto Carrier Conference agrees, it's going to get worse. If you see Mary Barra up on Congress getting called to the carpet about a recall item from 10 years ago, that's not going to be abnormal anymore. It makes good press, and so there's going to be more recalls. My daughter had a new Camaro, and they recalled it for a sticker on the passenger side airbag. And I thought, why don't you just mail me the sticker, I'll stick it on, but it's a recall. Well, unfortunately, what has tended to happen in the past is when these things get done, they get released in batches, and we're set up to be in the green. We can have reasonable spikes, but when we have it all at once, we can't do that. Now you throw that on top of whether it's weather capacity, rail capacity, or just some other combination of factors, the network gets so stressed that you're going to have this problem that we've seen in the last 3 or 4 months, I think, on an ongoing basis. Now, the other thing, a second solution, in addition to leveling out production, somehow I just think it's mandatory that we all try to work toward combining both the factory production, distribution, purchasing, and the remarketing purchasing. Because right now what happens is the OEMs, factory to dealer, have their own deal, and then they drive back, and to be honest, a lot of times it's empty. Same with the remarketing. They'll go to the dealer, and a lot of times, to be honest, they'll come back empty. If we can figure out how to put these things together, what happens for us is we do leave, then we go up, and remarketing might be an auction, might be a rental car agency, maybe whatever, and when we come back, we go where they need to, and what you're doing is you're optimizing the load factor, and it's really going to be, for everyone, more capacity, fewer trucks required to get it done, and an efficiency gain that we can all be proud of. Now, for us, I think optimizing the OEMs and the remarketing is clearly not our decision, but we wanted to say what a good time, given what's happened the last 4 months, to try to put that on your agenda. Lastly, this is, I think, an example, a great example of collaboration. Had a meeting with the CEO of a railroad, Norfolk Southern, Wick Moorman, to talk about this. And normally in the past, I don't think that the railroads or us would have agreed on anything that was a change. And it still may not happen. But he was a complete gentleman about it and actually considered and is going to present it to the other CEOs of the rail lines. Right now, because what's happened, we think we've lost a load, not every load, but on a lot of loads, we've lost full car. So we've asked for 2 things, to go to 80-foot long instead of 75-foot long, and an 88,000-pound limit. Now, we're not like most trucking, because remember, we drop trucks off along the road. It's typically only a few hundred miles, and then we come back empty, so this isn't the same. But what it does for us is if we can get that, not on every load, but it's up to another full car per load, and it gets us back what we've lost. So we are asking for support for everybody in the room to help us with this legislative initiative, because it's one of the few things that we can implement very quickly, impact inventories, impact cycle time, without having to add drivers, without having to add equipment, and it's the fastest recovery thing, and it also gives us that surge protection in a better sense than we've had before. Now, we want to be real clear, and Bob Farrell with the American Trucking Association is in the audience. Our intent is not to do this across all trucking. It is strictly limited to our little car haul niche, which is only about 12,000 trucks, by the way, out of the 3.5 million on the road. And I also would say that not only are we a very tiny 0.29% of the truck market, very small niche, but this happens to be our contribution not only to cycle time, reducing the inventory bubble that could be immediate, but we've all been given quite a bit of many objectives about the carbon footprint, and clearly this does this. These are based on studies in conjunction with the American Trucking Association, and 181,000 metric tons a year would be saved, and it's what I call a win-win scenario. So one last repeat of why we're asking for this help from everybody. This is an industry where I don't believe I've ever seen as many carcasses littered in, and these are not small guys. Ryder was in this industry. Swift Transportation was in this industry. Accurate wins an award one year as the carrier of the year, and the next year's in liquidation. PTS is 1,800 trucks straight into liquidation. Blue Thunder, liquidation. And of course, all of you know that we bought Allied in December, essentially out of a liquidation event. So this is an industry that just frankly needs the help. And I'm here on behalf of all of the auto carriers to ask each of you for whatever part you can play in this to help us support all of these initiatives, because our industry is significantly under capacity and we need your help. We're trying to come up with reasonable ideas to help the situation, but we can't do it without you. And I'd end on one final note again. Just keep in mind that what you just went through for the last 3 or 4 months may be the new norm. And if that's the truth, it's going to make life hard on all of us. And I don't see it just being weather in the future. It could be holes. It could be a whole lot of things that cause these kind of irregular things. And if this is the way we're going to do it, then we owe it to ourselves to try to maximize the throughput, maximize the capacity, and improve the system, especially in a way that should be theoretically a better cost and faster cycle time. Thanks very much for listening on behalf of all the auto haulers.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike, for an important and passionate appeal to the whole industry about how important it is to work together and to try and make the growth in the industry an opportunity instead of a headache that it looks like it might well be if some changes aren't made. You know, when you're in California, when you come over to California from the UK, you kind of think of Hollywood, think, you know, I'd like to be a leading star in a film. That's not kind of what I meant, Mike. But having said that, if anyone wants to make a real life version of Despicable Me, hey, you know, why not? So we've heard 3 very interesting presentations there. One looking at the market and the opportunities, what that means for the whole industry. Looking at finished vehicle logistics and service parts, benchmarking, and serving the customer in a better way. And of course, Mike's presentation on what's the reality of what's going to be affecting the auto haulers in the next few years. We haven't got so much time for questions, so I'll throw it open to the floor first. If anyone wants to ask a question, make a comment, you can do it through the live system, but we will always give preference to the people in the room. So if you've got a question, raise your hand, wait for the microphone, because that's even more important now with the live streaming, and pose your question or make your comment. Okay, so I'll ask a couple of questions, or a question firstly. To Jan, really, looking at you're responsible for service parts and vehicle logistics. Perhaps service parts sounds like it's been given more attention. It seems more advanced in many ways, seems more advanced from a supply chain benchmarking point of view. Are there any things that you think vehicle logistics can learn from the history, from the lessons that you've picked up at service parts as well? Benchmarking is one that you mentioned. Is there anything else that you think vehicle logistics could learn from customer service, from providing the dealer, any other thing that we can learn from service parts? Yeah.
One of the things I think we as an industry could be doing, and maybe that is one of the outcomes from that conference here today, is that we form a work group that deals with the different criteria that should be considered in such a benchmark initiative. And then there's a couple of participants, OEs as well as vehicle logistics services providers, who start a pilot project, if you will, and then one could see where that project leads to. Yes, I do believe that there's a couple of already well utilized examples from other industries where the vehicle logistics industry could learn from. Mm-hmm. Because I do believe capacity is one of the things. You know, we all have to work on greenhouse gas. We all have to work on more safety. We all have to work on, and that is common themes. That is what OEs share. That is what logistics services providers share. We have a lot of common ground we have to cover. And for that common ground to identify some key metrics that cannot be that hard. So that I would answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the floor yet? Okay, question to Mike, really. You talked about collaboration, you listed the issues, but to tie that down a little bit, you know, collaboration, what should be the next step? If there is an agreement that there should be collaboration, what's the next step? Where do you start? Who should be collaborating? It should be led by the car makers. Should it be led by the association? Should it be led by the logistics companies? What should be the next step to move in the right direction?
My view is the intermediary groups, AIG, the Alice group, are really the only way that can work so that we have everybody on the same page. I think it worked very well in the E-Pod. I believe Steve Tripp and Chrysler took the initiative on requiring EPAD as a contract, and it took something like that intermediary group to kind of shepherd to a common standard, and it worked very well, I thought. And not everybody was in agreement. Everybody has different hardware, different software, different systems, but it's the only way we'll come together. And I'd actually encourage that kind of activity, but expanding it, where the ship lines, the railroads, and the OEMs, along with the truckers, talk about benchmarks, standards, because it would benefit us all. And realize that, you know, I realize sometimes we think of ourselves as a competitor, but, you know, pretty much everybody in the room here has survived one of the greatest depressions in our industry over the last 3 to 5 years. You wouldn't be here unless you survived. So I think in a very real way, we're all in this together. It's why we don't mind sticking our hand out and saying we need your help. But you're exactly right. There needs to be a formalization of those activities, and you invite those groups to speak at your conference so we know who they are. I did see someone's hand back there, by the way, Louis.
Okay, thanks.
A question for Brandon, just related to, is ATP, average transaction price, something that you are tracking, and if so, what do you see with that?
So can you just say your name and the company name as well, please?
Yeah,
Thanks.
Darren McElroy with Foyt.
Thank you.
So yes, that is something that we track. What we've seen with transaction prices is that they are going up for a number of different reasons. You know, as interest rates are low, people are willing to finance more of that and put less down. But also, you know, vehicle prices are going up. If we think about different safety mechanisms that are now required to be in place, that adds cost to the vehicle. Different fuel efficiency technologies that are going into vehicles, that's increasing the cost of a vehicle. And then finally, just consumer preferences around infotainment. Everybody wants all the bells and whistles now. And even with base models, you're starting to see a lot more technology in vehicles. So for those reasons, we are seeing average transaction prices continuing to increase, and we think it'll be that way for the foreseeable future.
Okay, well, we've reached the end of the session anyway, so I think it was a great start to the conference. It was interesting to hear the numbers and to hear such positivity. But then we heard it's about, you know, coping with it. It's the processes. It's measuring yourself, measuring what you're doing, and working together. We heard about the challenges that Mike listed, the 4 main challenges: the change in financing, litigation, load factors, and weather. All of these are kind of process issues. There, you know, there's a session later on sweating the assets. It's about being, you know, more intelligent use of what we're doing and measuring and IT and systems and so on. So there's a huge challenge ahead for you guys, but there's also huge opportunities with this growth and new markets and new car launches. And it's a great time to be in the finished vehicle logistics industry in so many ways. But it's not going to be easy. But hopefully, with everybody working together, sorting out their processes, and developing the industry in the correct way, it's going to be a great place to be for the next 5-10 years. So we've got a lot to talk about over the next 2 days to make sure the industry develops in the correct way. But I'd like to thank the panel for opening the conference for us. Thank you. We will be splitting or having 2 rooms after the break. Imports and exports will be in this room, and the logistics win-win of remarketing will be in the other room just a little bit further down the hall. So take your things with you and enjoy your coffee break, and we'll see you back here at 11 o'clock. Thank you.